everyone, I'm Lisa from Taitra. Welcome to the Taiwan Trade Show's webinar for Taipei International Machine Tool Show, TIMTOS. First of all, I'd like to invite the organizer of TIMTOS, the Deputy Director of Taitra, Ms. Kathy Yang, to open today's session with a few words.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy. On behalf of Taitra, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar for machinery industry. As you may know, Taiwan machinery industry is famous for its competitive prices, fine quality, and prompt services. Above all, most business professionals are impressed by its integrated supply chains and complete industry clusters. No wonder it was the world's fifth largest machine tool exporter in 2019, with the production value reaching $3.5 billion. With their flexibility and efficient supply and delivery, Taiwan machine tool builders formed the national face mask production team after the outbreak of COVID-19. To our surprise, they've made the impossible possible. Within 40 days only, they set up 92 production lines, which would normally take 4 to 6 months to complete. Now Taiwan produces 90 million pieces per day and has become the second largest mask producer in the world. Moreover, Taiwan also donates face masks to other nations to fight against the pandemic and convey the message of Taiwan can help. Such a miracle has well demonstrated to the world the strength and flexibility of Taiwan machine tool industry. Recently, the Industry 4.0 has helped most sectors across the globe achieve smart manufacturing. With the support from Taiwan ICT industry, Taiwan's machine tool industry also introduced IoT, AI, cloud computing, and big data for industry upgrading. Therefore, Taiwan is able to offer total solutions and mass customization to clients worldwide. Taitra is the organizer of Taiwan's 7 major machinery industry exhibitions, such as TIMTOS, Taipei Plus, and WOODTAIWAN. Out of them, TIMTOS is one of the world's leading machine tool shows. The show will focus on IoT and AI, a full range of metalworking machinery, high-precision components, smart solutions, and production lines will also be showcased on March 15 to 20, 2021. In addition to physical exhibitions, Taitra has launched a series of integrated online services. This includes pre-show online sourcing meetings, online two-dimensional virtual reality exhibitions, TTSWEBINARS, TTS Insight online series, and other value-added digital services to connect buyers with supplies from home and abroad. Now I'd like to introduce our 3 speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Kenneth Tang, the publisher of Asia Pacific Metalworking Equipment News and Industry Automation Asia magazine. He will tell us about the impact and the challenges now being faced. Followed by Mr. Gabriel Pankow, the head of Digital Editorial Office at MeConnect. Mr. Pankow will focus on the European market and share his insight on how the market is dealing with the crisis. The third speaker is Mr. Michael Vaughn, Chief Consultant of Indiana Research Institute. He will be talking about the U.S. automotive and the metalworking market COVID-19 impact. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the speakers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kenneth Tan, publisher of Asia Pacific Metalworking Equipment News. Thank you, Taitra, for inviting me to give a presentation on this very big topic of impact of COVID-19 in ASEAN's metalworking industry. I only have 15 minutes of time, so therefore I put my email address and my website all on the slide itself. So In case after the event there's any question, please feel free to drop me a mail. I'll be more than happy to answer your further questions. Now, without any further delay, let me go into and show you what are some of the things that we will be covering today. Next slide, please. We will basically be presenting some ASEAN GDP. Why is this basically important? We believe that the ASEAN GDP is going to affect purchasing power and also show you how many and how long the impact potentially would affect your customers. And the other two industries that we'll be presenting will be automotive industry as well as aerospace MRO industry itself. The reason for us to present these two industries is because we believe that by showing you how your customer is basically buying will give you a long-term view of how things will evolve in your industry. Now, the last thing that we're going to present is food for thoughts, which is some of the observation that myself and my editorial team has put together to show you where are some of the business opportunity in ASEAN itself. Next slide, please. Now, ASEAN is currently the 5th largest world economy. We have just over $3 trillion in 2018 in turnover, but projected in the next 9 years, we should surpass Germany to reach $6 trillion as the world's 4th largest economy. So how did we basically manage to get here? Next slide, please. There are basically 4 different star growth countries. We are looking at Vietnam, which in the last 4 years has been growing at 7% at an average. We are currently looking at Philippines on the average 6%. Indonesia last 4 years has been growing at 5% and Thailand an average of 4%. Now, how would it look like after this pandemic? We have presented 2 different scenarios for you to take a look. Next slide, please. The first scenario represents a U-shaped recovery, which means that the problems should be over by mid-July and people will be able to resume their travel, their meetings in early August. Now, with that sort of projection, what are we looking at as the economy impact? For Indonesia itself, it will go from a usual growth of 5% to 0.4%. For Malaysia, it's from a 4% to a minus 6%. From Philippines, the usual 5 to 6% to minus 5%, a difference of 10%. And from Singapore, a 1 to 2% to basically minus 7%. And in Thailand, minus 8%. Now, what will actually happen if this particular pandemic gives us a V-shaped situation itself? Means that by September, we get hit with another round of virus attack. Next slide, please. We will be looking at some very horrific figures. In Indonesia itself, the growth percent will be from 5% to minus 4%. In Malaysia, minus 12%. Philippines, minus 10%. Singapore, minus 14%. And Thailand, minus 16%. Why is Thailand and Singapore worse hit than the rest? Well, when you have got tourism-centric economy itself, these two economies will be worse hit as compared to some of the other industry itself. But the good news is, if you really look at 2021, if we suffer that badly in 2020, 2021 represents much stronger growth opportunity for us all. Next slide, please. So what is the impact on automotive industry? Now, the global sales vehicle is projected to drop 22%, with Europe the worst hit. China currently is projecting, after a speed recovery, 13% drop only in terms of their sales number itself. What happened to the sales of the ASEAN countries? Now, sales of the new vehicles in ASEAN's 6th largest market declined by 19% in the first quarter. Next slide, please. If we go into details for each of the country itself, we can see Thailand has a drop of 34%, Vietnam has a drop of 35%, Indonesia 28%, and Malaysia 44% situation. Next slide, please. For full year wise, Vietnam sales forecast it's only to be declined by 15%, and that is from 322,000 to 273,000. Indonesia has a much steeper drop of 43% from 1.05 million to 600,000. In Philippines, the drop is 20% from 416,000 to 330,000, and in Malaysia, a 33% drop. Next slide, please. When we look at a projection into the next 4 years, In 2019, we managed 2.3 million vehicles in Southeast Asia itself. This year, the projection is 1.9 million, and the figure doesn't look that promising moving forward. So what are the things that is to be expected with this particular situation itself? Some of the auto parts manufacturers may have got to diversify to handle other sort of businesses other than simply just manufacturing auto parts. Some of your customers may also be looking for leasing as an opportunity rather than purely buying the machines. What about the aerospace industry? Next slide, please. Now, the global MRO industries doesn't look good as well. As of this particular point of time, 65% of the world 27,500 aircraft are grounded. So in the MRO business, when the aeroplanes are grounded, there is no flight, there is no repair, there's no maintenance. And when we look at the whole year projection, airlines in Asia Pacific see a 50% drop in passenger demand in 2020 as compared to 2019. So what does that tell us about the MRO industry? Well, the projection currently is global MRO industry will decline by 53% from 91.2 billion to US 42.7 billion. Now for Asia Pacific, the projection decline is 59%, with China taking the bigger blunt of that. Next slide, please. In the traditional MRO business, there are basically 4 different segments. Airframe maintenance, that's 1. Engine maintenance, that's 2. We have components manufacturing, and ultimately we have line management, line maintenance. Of these 4, traditionally engine maintenance represents the biggest component of them all, which we can see that the engine MRO business is projected to drop by 53% post-pandemic situation itself. Next slide, please. Now, the impact on MRO by country. Singapore has 2 of the largest so-called MRO supplier. ST Engineering, which is the world's largest airframe MRO service provider, has announced in their May company AGM that senior executive will basically take a pay cut from 15 to 30% to combat the rise of drop in orders. Rolls-Royce, which is also in Singapore, has announced on a worldwide basis they will cut 15% of the workforce because of reducing in numbers. Thailand, the Airbus has dropped the joint venture agreement with Thaiways simply because Thaiways has basically go bankrupt. The passenger traffic in Philippines, according to their association, is going to look fairly weak for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. But is there anything to be optimistic about the post-pandemic ASEAN MRO business? We believe so. Countries like Singapore, countries basically like Indonesia's, are still depending a lot on air traffic to be able to grow their economy itself. So we believe that the MRO industry will continue to grow at a 6% situation from now all the way to 2025. And with that, we believe that many of the long-term business projects that has been committed will continue to do so. What are some of those projects? Next slide, please. We can see that during this particular period of time, ST Engineering continued to secure contracts in the MRO area as well as components manufacturing up to the tune of $833 million. The joint venture between ST Engineering and Vietnam Air will continue to happen in Vietnam. And the government has also poured in $750 million just purely for Singapore alone to keep this particular industry growing. In Philippines itself, the biggest hangar that is to be built by Lufthansa will continue with its operation after the lockdown is over. And in Indonesia, they are seeing some of the MRO contracts that is rerouted from China to Indonesia for MRO business. Next slide, please. When we look at all the different informations, we tend to ask ourselves, so what is likely going to happen? So Asia Pacific Metalworking Equipment News Magazine conducted a survey with our readers as well as our advertisers. And these are some of our findings. 67.6% of our readers expect their business to decline by 50 to 60%. Now, this is in line with the May Taiwan machine export figures that your figures to Vietnam, and your figures to Thailand has basically dropped on average of 40 to 50%. What are some of the other concerns that they have? 60% of the people that is under the survey feels that there's going to be a global recession. Therefore, holding on to cash is very important. And we have 45% of our readers expecting that there will be a pent-up demand of up to 20% of the work volume that's going to happen after this particular crisis. Next slide, please. So with the news of auto industry and with the news of MRO doesn't looking that interesting, what are some of the other potential industries to basically expand or to look at? This is basically some of the lists that we have compounded. In the medical service industry, we believe that after this particular pandemic, all government will want to build some sort of medical facilities within their own countries, just in case that there's another pandemic that actually happens. The other thing that we observe is food industry has become one of the key sectors that has benefited in this particular situation, but there are a lot of calling for food safety issue, which means robotics and automations need to get in play when it comes down to food production, food delivery. The next sector obviously is something which Taiwanese manufacturers are very familiar with, the 5G segment itself. Taiwanese government and Singapore government has both give out the permits for 5G operation, and we're really looking forward to see how 5G can expedite the growth as well as digitalization for all of our industry itself. Now, there's just one last observation which we believe that we should take note of, and that is the devaluation of ASEAN's currency. With many of these particular countries currently that is in debt, borrowing up to the tune of 55-60% of their GDP, we believe that the currency devaluation is going to happen. Rado Bank projected that the currency devaluation for Indonesia rupiah is going to go down from current 14,500 rupiah to $1 to 17,000, representing a devaluation of 10+% situation. But we also noticed that the Taiwanese manufacturer, the Taiwan NT, is appreciating against the US dollar. That represents some creative pricing for machinery that could be possible. With that, I hope we have provided an overall picture of automotive industry as well as MRO industries and some of the highlights of potential growth in this particular region. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank and acknowledge my team for their contribution in terms of all this particular research. We also have got a barcode up there for you to scan in case you'd like to subscribe to our magazine. Thank you very much for your patience, and I wish you a good day.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Pankow and I am Editor-in-Chief of the news page Produktion. Today I will tell you something about the impact of the corona crisis on German economy. Next slide, please. The situation of the German industry before the corona crisis. Was the German industry in serious trouble anyway? So, even before the pandemic, the trade dispute between the United States and China weighed on business. Some companies are suffering from a shift towards electromobility. At the beginning of March, the German Mechanical Engineering Association VDMA expected production to decrease by 5% in 2020. This forecast is no longer valid, and there is no new one. However, the situation is even worse. Next slide. The impact of the corona crisis on German and European machinery. Who is in serious trouble? So, around 98% of the companies, and thus almost all mechanical engineering companies, are now suffering from the economic consequences of the corona pandemic, according to a VDMA survey among its member companies. The demand side is still very tense. Already at the beginning of May, a good third of the companies affected suffered serious order losses or cancellations. At the end of May, this figure rose to over 40%. Next slide, please. However, the problems with broken supply chains are being relativized step by step. Over 80% of the affected companies now report no or only minor disruptions on the supply side. At the beginning of May, this figure was 61%. Already at the beginning of May, there were signs of a relaxation of the supply situation along the value chains. This positive development has continued as the results of the latest survey shows. Over 40% of the companies also expect supply-side problems to decrease further over the next months. The liquidity situation of the companies changed only insignificantly compared to the end of March. About 70% of the companies affected have no or only a small and only 4% serious liquidity bottlenecks. The majority of the companies have been able to build up reserves in recent years. That is now paying off. However, economists look worriedly at the employment situation in the companies. Capacity adjustments can often no longer be avoided. For more and more companies, the downsizing of parts of the core workforce is becoming inevitable. The proportion of companies that already had a drop in sales in 2019 and now using this instrument is particularly high. By contrast, sales expectations in mechanical engineering have hardly changed in the past weeks. Around 6 out of 10 companies continue to expect sales to decline by 10 to 30% in 2020. It is not surprising that companies with a drop in sales in 2019 are somewhat more skeptical for 2020. Germany's mechanical engineering companies felt the full force of the corona crisis in April. Orders slumped by 31% compared to the same month last year. This was the sharpest decline since the financial crisis, with a drop of more than 50% in April 2009. Domestic orders fell by 25% in April this year. Foreign orders slumped by 34%. A quick end to the downward trend does not seem to be in sight for the time being. Next slide, please. The April figures most likely do not mark the low point yet. We are in the middle of a difficult second quarter. At the beginning of the pandemic, business was mainly burdened by torn supply chains. But in the meantime, the drop in demand in the industry is causing problems. Uncertain customers are holding back with orders. According to a survey, 30% of the mechanical engineering companies surveyed expect their order situation to deteriorate in the next 3 months, while 50% expect business to remain poor. Only 20% expect a slight improvement, mainly because business in China has picked up in recent weeks. Next slide, please. Who stand to benefit from the crisis? So, things are going well for companies such as the medical technology company Dräger or the manufacturers of logistic systems that supply online retailers. Also, the agricultural machinery industry is pretty stable. For instance, the company Arco Fendt even tries to exceed the previous year's production of almost 19,000 tractors. Fendt had to stop production at 4 of 6 locations at the end of March, despite the very good order situation, with the resumption of short-time work for all employees. Next slide, please. Also, the robotic company KUKA benefits from the crisis. For several years now, KUKA robots have been an integral part of the production of plastic medical laboratory products at the Ritter company. Due to the corona pandemic, demand has increased. A further 7 injection molding systems with KUKA robots are now being added at breakneck speed. In their injection molding systems, the plastic specialists produce medical consumables that are used in laboratories, for example, when liquids such as blood need to be analyzed. The robot unloads the system, places the finished cast part in the testing system, and then on the conveyor belt. So-called micro-titer plates and pipette tips are produced to handle the test liquids. The demand for these products has increased incredibly in the last few weeks. Ritter is now multiplying its capacity in order to be able to supply German and European laboratories and specialist dealers with sufficient material. Next slide, please. Outlook. what is necessary to overcome this crisis? So there is no empirical data for this crisis. There are few options to boost the economy. The measures that the German government initially took are helpful. But if the revival of many parts of the German economy continues for many more months, many companies will struggle to survive at some point. Next slide. If Germany wants to maintain its industrial base, foreign capital will in future be more important than ever. Long test times for takeovers and investments scare investors away. Also, turning away from globalization is pretty much the worst thing that can happen. I also warn of the late effects of the current measures because they suggest that the government must and can regulate everything through rescue packages, loans, and other financial aid at the expense of personal responsibility. Therefore, Germany needs a fitness program that works in summer and autumn and beyond. The four large German branches of industry, automotive, chemical, electrical, and mechanical engineering, consider the following fields of action to be particularly important. Next slide, please. First action area, taxes. In addition to the immediate measures already decided on, companies need tax relief quickly. This can also be seen against the background that corporate taxes currently occupy a top position in Germany in international comparison. Corporate taxes have to drop to an internationally competitive level, and corporate tax law has to be modernized structurally in order to provide additional stimulus for the economy and to keep companies in Germany. Second action field, investments. In order not only to leave debts in the public budgets of the next few years, but also to create long-lasting equivalent values, a focus must be on private and public investments. In addition to their positive income effects, they also strengthen the production potential of the economy. With improved depreciation conditions for capital goods, incentives for more private investment and thus for more growth can be set. This applies in particular to decreasive depreciation. It comparatively best reflects the actual value consumption of fixed assets. In contrast to specific investment trends, not only a certain clientele benefits here, but every company that drives investments and innovations. Incentives for private investment should also be flanked by more public investment. In order not to lose yourself in a smorgasbord of individual measures, the focus must generally be on the area of infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure. By benefiting all sectors, the greatest broad impact could be achieved. After all, a general moratorium on burdens is required at least until the end of the year, so that investments and entrepreneurial activity are not hindered by additional bureaucratic and regulatory provisions. Third action field, energy. Even before the corona crisis, the high level of energy costs reduced the international competitiveness of the companies producing in Germany. In order to expand company scope for investment and to promote the production and conversion of production processes to clean energy and electricity, the burdens have to decrease significantly. The government-related share of costs in energy prices must be reformed sustainably and geared towards climate impact, so that it will drop noticeably for climate-neutral energy sources. This can mobilize additional funds to build new sustainable economic structures. Next slide, please. Yes, this is what the German government actually does to support its economy. The Black-Red coalition wants to boost the economy in the corona crisis with a huge economic stimulus package. The government is also striving for a modernization push and want to promote future technologies, for example, for more climate protection. The economic stimulus package is to be worth 130 billion euros. This is intended to boost the economy and consumption of citizens. One of the core elements of the package is a reduction of the value-added tax. From July to December 2020, the value-added tax rate is to be reduced from 19% to 16%. In contrast, the leaders of the so-called Grand Coalition decided against a purchase premium for low-emission petrol and diesel cars. They did, however, decide on significantly higher premiums for electric cars. Coalition leaders also agreed on additional support in the billions for sectors that are particularly affected by the corona crisis. So-called bridging aid of a maximum of 25 billion euros is planned. This is to prevent a wave of bankruptcies among small and medium-sized companies. In addition, there are to be tax breaks to ensure the liquidity of companies and give them leeway for investments. The coalition also wants to spend more money, for example, on artificial intelligence and on the expansion of the new superfast mobile phone standard 5G. Next slide, please. Furthermore, in the fight against the economic consequences of the corona pandemic, Europe's monetary watchdogs have almost doubled their efforts. The European Central Bank, ECB, is increasing its corona emergency bond purchase program by 600 billion euros to 1.35 trillion euros. The central bank expects a severe recession in the Eurozone this year, with gross domestic product GDP slumping by 8.7% and inflation close to zero. ECB President Christine Lagarde spoke of an unprecedented economic slump. Unemployment, loss of income, and an unusually high level of uncertainty about future economic development had led to a significant decline in consumer spending and investment. But a recovery is expected in the third quarter of this year. According to the latest forecast of the central bank, the economy in the common currency area of the 19 countries is then expected to grow strongly by 5.2% in the coming year. In 2022, the ECB expects 3.3% growth. However, Lagarde said that the development would depend above all on the duration and success of the measures to contain the pandemic. I'm at the end of my lecture. Thank you for your kind attention.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Vaughn, Chief Consultant of the Indiana Research Institute. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the COVID-19 impact on the U.S. machine tool import market. COVID-19 is the greatest global public health crisis ever, driving a severe ongoing global recession. Many consider this the largest global recession in history. The pandemic has led to more than a third of the world's population being placed on lockdown and widespread stoppage of economic activity. As far as the U.S. impact, it has been impacted many global economies, but none more than the U.S. U.S. cases have exceeded 2 million, resulting in more than 100,000 U.S. deaths. U.S. unemployment is highest in history. Millions are out of work, with close to 90% of U.S. citizens impacted by the lockdown. U.S. Congress has passed almost $3 trillion in stimulus packages to aid citizens and businesses. Here are some of the questions we hope to answer today. What are the details of the U.S. lockdown? What is the impact on the economy and machine tool market? What are the market and business opportunities for machine tool manufacturers? Government lockdown details. The U.S. government proposed state and regional multi-phase criteria. State and local officials can tailor the application of this criteria based on local circumstances. The priority, however, must remain on the health and safety of all citizens. In Phase 1, which was implemented in March, the intent was to slow the coronavirus. A state of emergency was declared, borders were closed, lockdown orders issued in mid to late March. In Phase 2, the current phase for most of the U.S., lockdown begins to lift. Low, non-essential businesses start reopening in May. Criteria is cases must be on a downward trajectory for 14 days. Testing in place for at-risk individuals. Contact tracing implemented and sufficient healthcare capacity. Phase 3, which is targeted to start in July, the reopen continues with high-risk, non-essential businesses, schools, and activities reopening. The criteria includes a continued downward trend with no evidence of a resurgence in cases. Widespread testing and contact tracing remains implemented. Phase 4, which is targeted for the year 2021, brings us herd immunity and a vaccine. Herd immunity means 60% of the population has been exposed and gained immunity. A vaccine has been developed and approved with widespread availability. This will start the return to normal social and economic activities. Now let's talk about U.S. economic and business conditions. U.S. economic impact. Financial and stock market volatility. Global stock markets fell 20 to 30% during late February and March 2020. This was the first major sign of a recession. Shutdown of global economic activities and economic contraction has led to recession. We had already seen a global economic slowdown at the end of 2019. The lockdowns caused additional severe repercussions for global economies, driving the collapse of many industries and a significant downturn in consumer activity. Global demand will continue to fall in 2020 due to the decreased consumption and consumer confidence. Unemployment in the U.S. has hit a historic high of 14.7% in April of 2020, up from 3.6% in January. The U.S. has historically averaged 5.74% unemployment over the last 70 years. Unemployment projections for 2020 are as high as 19%, reducing to 15% in 2021 and 13% in 2022. As far as the U.S. business impact, there are four primary factors. Demand is down. Auto sales in the U.S. have declined by 40%. And not only manufacturing, but service sectors are experiencing the same. Without substantial revenue, many manufacturers will face liquidity problems. Lockdowns of up to 12 weeks have generated a dramatic global reduction in economic activity as a result of the lockdowns. Businesses are in cost reduction and survival mode. They are making permanent and temporary workforce reductions to cut costs. Reduction in capital spending is being done to cover operational expenses. Investments reduced during most of 2019 due to lack of confidence and fear of recession. This strategy will continue in 2020. Supply chains are broken. China is the world's main supplier. Many components are either not being made or are stuck in China. Many Chinese factories remain closed or have opened with limited capacity. Manufacturers are scrambling to secure necessary components for operations to resume or continue. Already present supply chain and manufacturing disruptions will shake global economies and prove challenging to remedy. Now let's look at the machine tool market overview. 2018, the machine tool market reached an all-time high. 2019, the machine tool was down slightly, but still a strong year. In 2020, machine tool market will remain down. The economy will continue to be cyclical as we slowly reopen and recover. International relations, election year will drive caution. Biggest consumers of machine tools, auto, aerospace, defense industries continue to struggle with demand and supply chain disruptions. 2021 to 2025 should bring gradual growth. The U.S. machine tool market is expected to witness a compound annual growth rate of 2.67% during the forecasted period of 2020 to 2025. In comparison, the global machine tool market is projecting a compound annual growth rate of 5%. Machine shops will be a big factor in the market growth as a result of many supply chain resource decisions. Let's look at the U.S. import market share for the machine tool industry. Historical data from 2017 and 19 tell us that Japan and Germany control about 50% of the market. Japan continues to be a global leader and slowly increasing revenue and market share. Germany remains a solid number 2. South Korea was number 7 in 2017, number 4 in 2018 and 19, showing a steady increase of revenue and market share. Italy returns to number 3 in 2019 after slipping to number 6 in 2018. Again, they show steady revenue increase. Taiwan was number 4 in 2017, number 3 in 2018, and number 5 in 2019. There will be many opportunities to increase the U.S. market share, and it will depend heavily on the competitive strategies around the globe. Taiwan export market overview for the machine tool industry. 2017 and 19 data shows us that China and U.S. historically control 40% of the export market. The China market share has decreased by 4.5% to date in 2020. Turkey moves from number 10 in 2019 to number 3 in 2020 with increased market share of 4.3%. Opportunities will exist for the increase in the U.S. and Asia Pacific regions for market share. Asia Pacific region should start the recovery first. Now let's look at some U.S. market opportunities. How to increase the market share in the U.S. for the machine tools. There will be strategic retooling of production systems by manufacturers to make different products. Completely different products. For example, the medical equipment being manufactured at auto factories today. It could be new models being introduced. It could be because of increased capacity. But production systems will always be retooled due to revised demand or products. The next point is a fragile, broken supply chain. These need to be rethought and rebuilt. This includes resourcing of projects, whether it's multi-sourcing, overextended suppliers, or region-for-region strategy. Supply chain disruptions during the COVID-19 have made many industries realize the over-reliance on China will be destructive. Favorable trade agreements and tariffs. Use them to your advantage to increase market share. The last initiative will be the reshoring initiative, which will be key for the U.S. This will bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Fragile supply chains have exposed our dependence on offshore global sources. We must take the initiative to shorten and rebalance supply chains to mitigate risk without sacrificing profitability. Just-in-time manufacturing. processes have propagated the impact across the globe. Limited use of inventories put heavy reliance on just-in-time manufacturing with offshore suppliers. Now let's look at opportunities for business and marketing strategies. Review strategies for competitive and sustainable advantage. Be creative. Differentiate your business products and services better than the competition. Be able to articulate the benefits you provide to your target markets that's better than the competition. Machine price, delivery, reliability, performance are all critical for customers. My old saying is, deliver the right quality at the right time with the right price, and you will gain market share. Businesses need to have a readiness. Be prepared when the opportunity to increase market share exists. Learn from the lessons experienced and make improvements that strengthen your business for the future. Create a resilient supply chain. Rethink and rebuild from Tier 1 to Tier 4. Smarter resourcing decisions so you can react when the economy rebounds. The recent disruptions in the supply chain have revealed that machine tool manufacturers over-rely on suppliers of key components. Now in closing, I have a few comments. COVID-19 hit, but manufacturing will hit back. Recovery will make us stronger than before. We will recover together. Success is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So businesses, do your homework. Now the question is, how and when will global societies and economies return to normal? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dam, Mr. Pankow, and Mr. Vaughn for sharing. That's all for today's webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Our next TIMTOS will be held from March 15th to 20, 2021. We look forward to seeing you next year in Taipei. If you are interested in TIMTOS or online services, you can visit our website. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay tuned for more industry coverage. I wish you, your family, and friends the very best of health. Bye-bye.